Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock on Wednesday, the 8th of October, 2025. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Charles Malet, and joining me by live link from Lebanon is Vanessa Beeley. Now, amongst the things we'll be looking at in today's programme are the elections in Syria, the continuation, if we might describe it as that, of the Gaza peace plan, the coincidence of renewable energy statistics and indeed the steel industry, and what the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is doing, or at least thinking of doing at the moment, and some news about the censorship regime and the relationship with UK Column, but that will follow at the end of the programme. We're going to start, though, with the appointment of the 106th Archbishop of Canterbury, Dame Sarah Mullally, and the ripples that that has caused. Now, bearing in mind the ignominious nature of Justin Welby's departure, it may come as something of a surprise to learn that there could have been a greater degree of controversy from this appointment, but that is exactly what has happened, and I will walk you through some of the steps that give rise to this sort of sentiment. But first, we'll listen to Sarah Mullally after being appointed and what she said about her forthcoming ministry.
Washing feet has shaped my Christian vocation. As a nurse, then a priest, then a bishop. In the apparent chaos which surrounds us, in the midst of such profound global uncertainty, the possibility of healing lies in acts of kindness and love. With humility and grace, we uphold and support those in need of our help. We do this to the best of our ability, in small ways and bigs, according to our own very particular gifts. That too is the service which I offer the Church today.
Now, this might seem unfair, but not necessarily the words or intonation to inspire a nation, one might say, but she does make a point of referring to chaos and uncertainty, and whilst one may not be able to dispute that those are indeed present elements, what is she going to do in order to change that? And also, it was interesting to note her intonation of the words healing lies, as though she might be suggesting something other than she was apparently saying. Now, it is, again, worth saying that in comparison with Justin Welby, even, she doesn't necessarily look like an outwardly muscular Christian. She's unlikely to set the world on fire, or indeed those that consider themselves part of the Anglican community at the moment. The Anglican Communion. Now, what is very relevant, seemingly, even though it's relatively distant, is that in 1999, Sarah Mullally was appointed by the government as the chief nursing officer, a post which she held until 2004. She was ordained in 2001, of course, the year of the so-called foot and mouth crisis in the United Kingdom. And when she was Bishop of London in 2021, this is what she had to say about the COVID injections. She said, "The relaxation of restrictions on Monday is only possible because of the vaccination programme, which has reduced the percentage of those with COVID who became seriously ill or die. We're indebted to all who've developed and administered the vaccines, and we encourage anyone who has not yet done so to take advantage of the protection they offer." Now, this, of course, is redolent of the words used by Justin Welby, who, I paraphrase, said that Jesus would have got jabbed, which seems incredibly unlikely. Taking personal responsibility, she went on to say, means responsibility for our neighbour, not just for ourselves, and taking precautions to protect those more vulnerable than we consider ourselves to be. So she went on in this sort of vein, effectively foretelling exactly the direction that not just she, but the Church of England is likely to continue to go in with regard to towing the line in so far as the official narrative concerning, frankly, anything is concerned. Now, in her capacity as a nurse, she also has served as a director of the Royal Marsden Cancer Charity, And whilst there, part of her remit was to facilitate funding of drug development, as well as Rapid Diagnostic Assessment Centre. And of course, we see now in 2025 exactly the direction that things have gone in, have progressed in. And I think something that's well worth drawing out is that not only this, but in the full accounts of the charity from the year ending 2007, which she's shown here as a director of, there was a surplus in the accounts of 19.1 million, and decided by the directors that they would invest such funds. Now, what I would like to point out is that they state explicitly that there was no restriction on the use of those funds, or at least the way in which they may be invested, except for a restriction on tobacco products. Now, it might be strange for an ordained priest, as she was by that stage, to put herself in such a position, except that it must be noted that this is absolutely consistent, broadly at least, with the policies of the Church Commissioners and the treatment of the Church of England funds. Now, there are two articles on the UK Column website which I've written about exactly this issue, the so-called ethical investment policies of the Church of England. First of all, shown on screen here, one dealing with the very limited restrictions concerning pornography, weapons and embryonic stem cells. And then further, the Church of England talking themselves up as being in the room with big tech, effectively saying that they need to be invested in these sorts of companies which harvest data and all the rest of it in order to be able to influence the decisions they make, whilst providing no evidence that they have actually managed to have that sort of an effect. Now, again, very interesting to note on this particular issue that I was in touch with the Bishop of Bath and Wells earlier this year, because at the General Synod he'd raised issues about the way in which the Church Commissioners do spend their money, and I had drawn his attention to these apparent inconsistencies with the Church Commissioners' investment policies, and he simply wrote back saying, if you have concerns or questions about the Church Commissioners, please can I suggest that you address these to the First Church Estates Commissioner, rather than thanking me for what I'd presented and committing to investigate the matter himself. So it's not just the Archbishop of Canterbury that needs to be scrutinised. It's frankly anyone within the church hierarchy at a time where the Church of England has, in many respects, entered into a sort of a downward spiral, which tells a lot about the way in which British culture may be reviewed at this time. Now, going back to her Mullally's commitment and involvement with the Royal Marsden, it shouldn't be any great surprise to see that the Marsden is now, of course, referring to the power of vaccines to prevent and treat cancer. So it seems highly likely that the two disciplines of religion and science, which, of course, used to be certainly in the distant past, not necessarily separated from one another or not in conflict with one another, but then have become so. It looks like there is a reunion of sorts, although for a totally separate set of reasons. And then moving on to other issues, we've got the continued failure of the church with regard to safeguarding. And just to give an insight as to the way in which Mullally may have responded to any of this, we'll just look at a short video clip from 2023 of her being asked a question about the issues raised by some Pride events.
Chair, there is evidence of sexualisation and grooming of children at some Pride events. What is the House of Bishops doing to protect children from that sexualisation at Pride or from queer theory? Thank you.
That does not relate to the question, the original question, I'm afraid.
It does. It's about the Bishop's position on Pride, Chair, and whether they're protecting children from Pride. They should have a position and be able to tell me. Because you don't want to protect children and you dare not speak against Pride or queer theory. Shame on you.
Please.
Now, if you're just listening and you couldn't see that, the response should have come from Bishop, as she was then, Sarah Mullally, but she stood there completely mute and didn't address the question or the concerns at all. Now, the articulation of all these various issues has been put very succinctly by the Global Anglican Conference, or GAFCON, and they've written a long statement in response to the appointment of Sarah Mullally, and I will just read some of it out because it does cover a number of the points. They say that the news has finally arrived after months of prayer and long waiting, but it is with sorrow that GAFCON receives the announcement today of the appointment of Dame Sarah Mullally as the next Archbishop of Canterbury. This appointment abandons global Anglicans as the Church of England has chosen a leader who will already further divide a split communion. And at this point, I should point out that the Church of Nigeria has publicly rejected Mullally's appointment for a host of reasons. First of all, that she is a woman, and also that she supported the blessings of same-sex unions. But to get back to the GAFCON statement, they say, due to the failure of successive Archbishops of Canterbury to guard the faith, the office can no longer function as a credible leader of Anglicans, let alone a focus of unity. As we made clear in our Kigali commitment of 2023, we can no longer recognise the Archbishop of Canterbury as an instrument of communion or the first among equals of global primates. Now, these are fairly damning words. And they go on to talk about the specific failure of her to uphold her consecration vows. When she was consecrated in 2015, she took an oath to, quote, banish and drive away all strange and erroneous doctrine contrary to God's word. And yet, far from banishing such doctrine, Bishop Mullally has repeatedly promoted unbiblical and revisionist teachings regarding marriage and sexual morality. Now, they go on in the same vein, and the link to this will be in the show notes. I would recommend not just reading it, but sending it on, because it does absolutely call into question the underlying reasons for such an appointment, apparently very much intended to cause the division that we're seeing not just in the Church of England, but of course across all of British society. And I would just finish off by pointing you towards a discussion that I had with Alex Thompson entitled A Question of Faith. Why did the Church of England go wrong? Of course, some of these and other issues are addressed in this, so please do have a look at that. Now, that's all on the Archbishop of Canterbury. We'll now go over to Vanessa. Now, of course, the mainstream version of events in Syria has very much been at odds with, first of all, what you've seen there yourself, Vanessa, but also what you're having reported to you. What's your feeling on the way things have been reported and what has actually happened now?
Oh, well, I'm sure in the West, you're saying the BBC and CNN and so on declaring that democracy has finally landed in Syria after the reign of the dictators, both Father Hafez al-Assad and Bashar al-Assad, of course. But in fact, the opposite is the reality. Whatever democracy did actually exist under both Assad presidents has now been completely dismantled and disintegrated. This is a tweet put out by Syria Justice Archive, and I do recommend following them actually because they monitor and archive all of the atrocities committed by Jolani's or Takfiri gangs in Syria. And what they point out is that the majority of the minorities in Syria basically boycotted the elections. In fact, they were not allowed to vote. And another article put out by The Cradle, which we use very often just to follow the news in this region. The new Syrian parliament, overwhelmingly Sunni Muslim male, following a controlled vote. So very few women, if any, in the eventual parliament. And I would actually change from Sunni to Takfiri because the majority of those in inverted commas, elected were actually approved and selected by Jolani himself. This I covered in a recent article, which can be found in the Syria-centric section on UK column, Syria, the looming civil war while external forces exploit the chaos. And this is the section in the article that we published actually before the election. So the number of seats in the People's Assembly will be 210, distributed among provinces according to their population. 70 members, even to begin with, will be appointed by Jolani, but the remainder will be selected by various subcommittees, selected by the Supreme Election Committee, which is appointed by Jolani. So that gives you a very good idea of the sheer corruption and ridiculousness of these elections, of course, again, being heralded by the West, who brought Jolani to power, and Israel, as democratic elections. This little infograph, which people can freeze frame and have a look at, basically shows how dire the situation is. So effectively, only 6,000 people actually voted, 0.02% of the Syrian population. And those that were effectively banned from voting were in the areas of so-called conflict, as Jelani described them, which actually means, of course, the areas where Jelani is carrying out the massacres and the ethnic cleansing of Syrian minorities. And this map, again, which is rather sinister, but it shows there the black and grey, the areas that are now under the control of all of Jolani's henchmen selected by him in the so-called elections. And the greyer areas are basically Takfiri factions under his control. The rest of Syria, as you can see, didn't partake in the actual vote. Again, you can freeze frame it and look at the key there. This is interesting. This was actually in the Syrian Christian town of Al-Skelbia. If people who've been following my work at UK Column will remember that I reported from there many times, but if you can just leave it on screen for a second. When Skelbia, Christian town in northern Hama, was under attack from the very Takfiri factions that are now in control. And this was the candidate of a Syrian Christian town. Luckily, she wasn't elected, but I'd also like to point out that when there are claims that Iran is enforcing veiling in Iran, this is actually what is happening inside Syria itself. And then, of course, in the midst of elections, who turns up? None other than the commander of CENTCOM, Admiral Brad Cooper, and Tom Barrack, Trump's economic hitman in the region. Here, they're congratulating Jelani on the success of the elections. And at the same time, of course, they met with the Kurdish separatist factions in the northeast of Syria. And what they're pushing for, of course, is the integration of the Kurdish factions that control Syria's oil and agricultural resources in the northeast under Jelani's umbrella. Now, of course, the Kurds themselves, who do they basically represent inside Syria? The interests of Washington, Tel Aviv, and to some degree Russia, because of course the Kurds will be seen as the final link in the chain that will be David's corridor, that will go from the south of Syria to the northeast, using the Kurds as basically a link in that chain. And the final picture is the Kurdish factions meeting with the various CENTCOM officials. Now, of course, the Kurds will be used and weaponized against Turkey and against Erdogan's neo-Ottoman expansionist schemes. So very much they are a tool of empire, but particularly a tool of Israel and Washington in Syria. And what this demonstrates, because there have been clashes between the two factions, HTS, the Turkish-backed factions, and the Kurds, is that Washington is very much in control of events on the ground in Syria, and that, of course, is in favor of Israel.
Absolutely. Vanessa, also, I think pertinent to this is the recent discussion that you had with Mike concerning sectarianism. Will you just give a sort of snapshot insight into that and encourage people to listen to it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, we discussed the similarities between what is now being engineered in the West that follows on from what has been engineered in the region, in particular in Syria, that prior to the coup of December last year was a secular, inclusive country. Now, of course, the sectarian divides are being not only orchestrated, but exacerbated by the West.
Super. Vanessa, thanks very much indeed. There's so much for bringing democracy to the Middle East. Now we move on to a persistent, reinforcing a persistent point, which is that renewable energy is absolutely here and it is to be praised, and indeed it is to triumph. And the BBC are busy giving us the impression that it's now taken over from traditional or fossil fuel sources of energy, but I'm going to introduce a UKC Verify button here, because the BBC headline saying renewables overtake coal as world's biggest source of electricity is not exactly founded in fact, and the devil, as always, is to be found amongst the detail. So the first thing to point out, of course, is that this claim does actually include nuclear power, which hides the inherent instability of the forms of renewable energy. This comes from a report printed by Ember, which concerns only the 6-month period at the beginning of this year, but also, and very specifically, we see it on screen now, the Global Electricity Mid-Year Insights 2025. Now, this graph, confusing as it may be, and I'm not necessarily going to go through the detail of it, but basically the green bit on the left is concerning solar and wind, and the demand on the right, the increase in demand, is shown to be outstripped by the increases in solar and wind. So the main point to fall out of this is that we're talking about the increase in demand. We're not talking about total demand or total supply. So the way in which this has been spun, not necessarily by the BBC article shown on screen, but certainly by the way in which it's being reported verbally and in a broadcast news sense, is not, strictly speaking, an accurate reflection of what Ember is putting out. And of course, it is also worth bearing in mind that with statistical analysis, one can create the impression that almost anything is actually happening if you happen to select the right time and the right things to look at. Now, that's not to dismiss entirely what has happened, but just to set the context, I will show you the energy dashboard from 9 o'clock this morning, which gives you the generation mix from the United Kingdom, and that is very much at odds with what's being reported, because, of course, we see on the right of the diagram shown here that over half of the energy supply is being provided by gas, with only 17.8% coming from wind and an absolute fraction from solar. And of course, the point to drop out of this, bearing in mind that the whole point of renewable energy, so we're told, is to reduce carbon, when they of course mean carbon dioxide. But the carbon intensity here is described as being very, very high. So in actual fact, the way this is reported is fairly disingenuous. Now, to move on to something that might seem unrelated, but is in fact very much connected, we're going to go to the European Commission, and they've made an announcement on what should really be described as protectionist steel tariffs. I should just point out that their front page of their website at the moment can't resist but refer to the speeding up of AI uptake in industry and science, but that's slightly by the by. So they say the Commission proposes a plan to protect EU steel industry from unfair impacts of global overcapacity. Now, in their statement, they speak about presenting a proposal to protect the EU steel sector from unfair impacts of global overcapacity, a vital step towards ensuring the long-term viability of a strategically crucial industry. And they carry on in that tone. Now, all well and good, but it's somewhat at odds with the way in which they reported the tariffs introduced by the US administration back in March, when they said that the Commission regrets the US decision to impose such tariffs, considering them unjustified, disruptive to transatlantic trade, and harmful to businesses and consumers, often resulting in higher prices. Now, we go to the trade publication UK Steel, and they point out that one of the many handicaps to UK steel production is, of course, energy. And in their report, Closing the Power Gap, you can see the bar on the right showing that the price of energy in this company, as compared with Germany and France, is far, far outstripping it. And of course, that's set alongside the lack of availability of home-produced coking coal and the nationalisation and many other factors which have been reported on by UK Column over this year. It suggests that that UK Steel, of course, has many, many challenges set against it. But the main point to draw out of this, really, with regard to the balance of trade, is the difference between import and export. Now, from the UK Steel report, they say outside of China, 38% of steel produced travels across borders, with the UK importing 70% of its requirements and exporting 39% of its production. So, in effect, the statistics don't really tally with the sense of outrage that there would be tariffs on steel being imported into the EU, when, of course, the UK is very, very much a net importer of steel in the first place. Now, just to get to the issue of energy, I thought it'd be interesting to point out the IEEE spectrum data on AI, because we hear that AI is absolutely everywhere. And from figures given by ChatGPT or OpenAI, which has created ChatGPT, these stats are basically an extrapolation of the imagined situation leading to 2030, which basically says that 44 nuclear reactors would be required just to power artificial intelligence. Now, of course, that is one of many concerns. First of all, the renewable issue, as discussed at the beginning of this, which is why it is all pertinent and relevant to the production of steel, but also the matter of water. And indeed, in a year in the United Kingdom where we're told that we are very short of water, indeed in certain regions, we absolutely are. But the relentless push towards AI has huge environmental impact, which again seems to be something that the energy industry does not have an answer for in any shape or form. Now, moving on to what it is that the UK column does. And one of those things is to provide a massive resource of research spanning almost 2 decades now. So if there are any topics that you are curious about, please do go to UK Columns, your first port of call, and indeed encourage others to do so, because we hope, of course, that will encourage you to join as a member. And if you would like to support, then there is a button on the front of the website to show you how you can make a donation or join and support what we do, because it's very important that we do have that continued financial support to keep us going. The shop, of course, does sell a variety of items shown on screen now, the very popular hoodies. So there for you, should you choose to walk around and promote the UK column, which we'd love you to do. Now, on Tuesday, yesterday, Sandy Adams put out a very good interview with Neil McRae, the title of which is The Lie of Cataclysmic Anthropogenic Climate Change, very pertinent to what I've just been talking about, of course. Now, that's gone down very well, so I would recommend listening to that if you haven't done so already. And last night on the Germ Warfare podcast, we had Ian Davis talking about digital ID, and that, of course, very much a subject of the moment. So again, absolutely worth listening back to. Now, tonight, Germ has more with Carl Czar, and he's talking about the more nuanced history of Chairman Mao. So that's going out at 7 o'clock tonight. Germ now back from China, and there'll be more coming out in relation to what he saw and did there. And then tomorrow, we have Patrick Henningson's talk from the Hope Freedom Festival over the August bank holiday weekend, and that goes out at 1 o'clock. And that takes us to our upcoming event in York. UK column on location. As you well know by now, it's sold out in person, but there is a live stream, and it is really important to make the point that if you do buy a ticket for the live stream, you don't need to watch it at the time. You do get access to Andrew Wakefield's phenomenal film, Protocol 7. And just a quick reminder of who we've got there and why. We've got Andrew Wakefield, who will be talking about his career being derailed after questioning the efficacy and safety of vaccines, but also his subsequent filmmaking career, especially Protocol 7, of course, which you will have access to. We've got Liz Evans talking about the murky world of medical ethics, as well as Julian Rose on the relationship between human health and the soil. And he's got 2 very impactful interviews on UK column if you want to get a flavour of what he is all about. We've then got Tess Laurie on her journey through establishing and running the World Council for Health, and Ben Rubin on the history and the impact of the National Health Service. Now, on an admin note, if you do have a ticket, an in-person ticket, we're encouraging you to register on the Friday evening before the event. Now, you will get an email, so don't worry, you don't have to scribble all this down, but there will be registration possible from 6 o'clock until 8:30 in the evening in the room that the conference will be held. So please do consider doing that, because it will make life easier and give you a bit more time on the Saturday morning. But as I say, an email will follow about that. Right, now, Will Coleshill has been reporting for us on several issues over the past few months, but in a way, none more crucial or critical or indeed emotionally charged than the inquest into the death of Paloma Shemirani. And he has now a report, a concluding report into that inquest, but also the very aggressive and oppressive treatment of her mother, Kate Shemirani, by the mainstream media. So we'll just have a listen now to Will's concluding report on this matter.
On Thursday last week, I again headed down to Maidstone Coroner's Court to cover the verdict into the inquest of the death of Paloma Shemirani, daughter of Kate. Over the course of the trial, I've been the sole independent journalist in attendance each day. And this time, we've heard from Paloma's family, including her mother Kate, her GP, the main doctor who treated her in the incident in December 2023, a psychologist who assessed her capacity to make medical decisions and gave her supportive therapy, a number of alternative medical practitioners who treated her at various times between early and mid-2024, the paramedics who treated her when she collapsed, the doctor who took the decision to end her life shortly after the incident, and the pathologist who examined her body. Since my last report, we've also heard the testimony of another pathologist who spoke on the post-mortem and questioned the lack of further testing, which would, she said, have enabled a clearer picture of alternative therapies available. The coroner set out to cover a number of fundamental questions: the relevant medical history, diagnosis and proposed treatment, capacity to make decisions, what treatment and therapies were available, her collapse, any delay in ambulance arrival, the actions of the ambulance service, further treatment at the end of her life, and the cause of death. Raised by Kate, there were also the issues of the actions of the Maidstone and the ambulance medications, as well as issues with the post-mortem, and finally raised by Gabriel, Paloma's brother, there is the allegation that Kate had killed her daughter through coercive control. In the case of the cause of Paloma's death, the coroner ruled that it was caused by a number of cumulative factors. Hypoxic ischemic brain injury caused by cardiac arrest, caused by a primary mediastinal B-cell lymphoma mass. The coroner went on to explain that the Gerson and other alternative therapies could not and did not help Paloma with cancer. This was not a surprising result given the general consensus of the medical practitioners who gave testimony. The coroner found that the application of adrenaline would most likely have kept her alive, dismissing concerns by Kate it could have caused brain damage without much discussion. The most shocking ruling came in relation to the issue of Paloma's competency. Although the coroner, as expected, ruled Paloma to be competent to make decisions legally, having been provided comprehensive evidence that Paloma was able to make her own decision, she had posited that Kate still held a role in her daughter's death. Citing that other people collaborated with Paloma in her testimony to the High Court, she essentially threw all of the signed documents out as invalid. This is particularly controversial for multiple reasons. Firstly, these are the most clear statements of Paloma's intention and signed by her. Secondly, because it is common practice to collaborate on the wording of legal documents. And thirdly, because these line up with sentiments expressed in Paloma's diary in her own handwriting. The coroner has alleged that Kate, who cared for her daughter during this time, preparing food and driving her to appointments, acted as a medical practitioner. In particular, she cited that Kate directed Paloma to various medical practitioners or alternative therapies. As such, she said that Kate, by this role, acquired a duty of care which was derogated by the fact that she did not counsel Paloma to engage with conventional medical therapy. This is particularly unexpected considering Paloma continued to meet with her GP, for example, and with other medical practitioners, such as a cardiologist, seeking a referral. As such, Paloma had the opportunity to engage with conventional medical practitioners, as was evidence in court, which, should she be competent as evidence and ruled, would seem to enable her to be able to make her own decision against conventional medicine. With regards to Paloma's ability to form a clear picture and have informed consent, one of the most significant factors appears to be the decision to reject a scan to indicate progression or regression of the mass. I was privately told by friends and family Paloma wanted this delayed until after she had defeated her brother in the High Court, something which she did not live to see. Further, the coroner has ruled that Paloma was convinced by Kate, again, despite Paloma's competence, that she had been poisoned against her consent from almost the moment she was first given drugs at the Maidstone Hospital in December 2023. The coroner accepted seemingly wholesale the testimony of Dr. Mohan, who, of course, left the country subsequently after her day in court, seemingly never to return. In contrast, she derided the testimony of Kate. Very little, if anything, was made of the lack of a consent form for the drugs, to which we heard Paloma had an extremely bad reaction and sickness, and which hardened her against conventional medicine. This ruling appears to place a trust in the NHS, which contrasts with the systematic and commonplace NHS malpractice most starkly exhibited in recent years. As such, in a controversial ruling, the coroner has accepted nearly every piece of evidence against Kate and ruled that Kate, in essence, contributed to Paloma's death, whilst dismissing nearly everything in her favour. However, the coroner stopped short of declaring Kate guilty of unlawful killing, citing the involvement of other people who she could not deliberate. This has been a protracted inquest filtered almost entirely through the lens of mainstream media. As mainstream propagandists such as Marianna Spring capitalise on this judgment to pursue their political agendas, unanswered questions remain as to elements of the ruling, which will certainly cast doubt upon its veracity as the full picture in the eyes of many. This is Will Coleshill, reporting for UK Column.
Well, a harrowing and very concise report there from Will Coleshill. It might seem overly cynical to suggest that it was probably never going to go any way other than that. But Vanessa, I'd be interested to know your thoughts on it, either on the verdict itself or the way in which Kate Shemirani has been treated, and indeed what would be next for her.
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is that this seems to be part of the operation to separate families. In other words, to take away the parental supervision or involvement in their children's health and education and so on. I mean, when a mother is going to be prosecuted for effectively providing advice and consultation for her daughter, who they're saying basically was of sound mind and could make her own decisions, I don't know. It seems to me to be a sort of horrific verdict.
I think horrific is exactly the right word, and it looks like an extreme case of cherry picking. We will have the chance to talk about this more in Extra, because I'm glad to say that Will Coleshill will be joining us in Extra, and not only will we have the opportunity to talk about this, but also his recent reporting on the protest concerning the proscribed group Palestine Action. So please do hang around for Extra if you are a member. If you're not, you have got time to sign up after the main news programme. Now we're going to go back to Vanessa, because last week you were speaking about the so-called Gaza peace talks, and you've got more for us on exactly that issue.
Yeah, I mean, basically we're heading for the big finale, but I just wanted to put in a bit of context. So, of course, the big issue for Israeli commentators or pro-genocide commentators, particularly like Benjamin Netanyahu, is, of course, the return of the hostages. But I just wanted to bring this up on screen. This was from the Times of Israel shortly after the 7th of October in a conversation with families of the hostages, where it was stated by one of the family members. We later found out that Hamas had offered on October the 9th or 10th, so a few days after the 7th of October, to release all the civilian hostages in exchange for the Israeli forces not entering the Gaza Strip. But the government rejected the offer. And of course, we know that this has been the pattern since the 7th of October. And it's very clear that Netanyahu is not interested in the return of hostages. He's interested in the final solution in Gaza and the West Bank. And then, of course, the fact that the claims that are being reignited right now, that 7th of October was the 2-year genocide date yesterday, that there are, in fact, in the show notes, there's a 9-minute video showing all of the testimonies from various Israeli forces and officials directing to the fact that they carried out the Hannibal Directive, which was effectively to kill their own civilians and soldiers on the 7th of October to prevent them being taken hostage by Hamas and the various resistance factions. So basically, that's the scenario that these peace talks, or so-called peace talks, I see it again as a bit of a charade, are going to be conducted in Egypt right now. This is something that was published in Axios by Barak Ravid. Trump huddles with Jared Kushner, of course, his son-in-law, and the Gaza waterfront property mogul, and Steve Witkoff, ahead of crucial Gaza talks. They've arrived today alongside the Qatari Emir, the head of Turkish intelligence, and President Sisi has actually invited Trump to the signing of the ceasefire agreement. So there's a lot of pressure on the resistance factions right now to basically complete this deal. But of course, there are a lot of points within that plan from Trump that simply are not going to be accepted by Hamas. So in my opinion, we're heading for the same degree of fall from these peace talks But of course, it's being raised up much higher than before, which in my opinion, again, means that the final aggression is going to be far more substantial than has been to date, which is saying a lot. So this is Trump basically bigging up his own peace plan. If we can just roll this video.
We're in very serious negotiations to, I guess you could say, depending on the way you count, 3,000 years, you could say 500 years, you could say, but that it's been raging for a long time. And I think there's a possibility that we could have peace in the Middle East. It's something even beyond the Gaza situation. We want a release of the hostages immediately, etc. And so our team is over there now. Another team just left, and other countries, literally every country in the world has supported the plan.
Yep.
I don't think there's anybody that hasn't, actually, not that I've seen.
I mean, just Trump at his best again, 3,000 or maybe 500 years. I mean, the lack of accuracy is quite mind-boggling. But this is one of the points, this was reported by Al Jazeera, this is one of the points that is going to be a sticking point in the entire agreement. An umbrella of Palestinian factions, the PFLP is now there, the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and Islamic Jihad have joined the meeting today, issued a statement promising resistance stance by all means, stressing that no one has the right to cede the weapons of the Palestinian people. And I do find this quite extraordinary, that those that are being asked to cede their weapons are those that are effectively defending their homeland against an aggressive occupation force that is committing genocide. Surely it is Israel that should be disarmed and de-radicalized. And this is Ayal Zamir, who made a statement yesterday: there is no ceasefire but a change in the operational situation. If the political effort does not succeed, we will return to fight. We will not allow Hamas to remain undefeated as the governing and military system in Gaza. This is General Ayal Zamir, the chief of staff of the Israeli forces. Now, interesting, there's been a lot of criticism of President Putin's reaction to the Trump plan from many within independent media. Of course, China and Russia have until now failed to impose any kind of economic boycott on the Zionist entity. In fact, China is increasing trade with Israel, not only with Israel, but also with Arab nations that have normalized relations with Israel. So let's just have a look at this. This was just a statement from RT. Putin and Israel's Netanyahu just held a phone call. They discussed Trump's Gaza plan, talked stabilizing Syria and finding solutions to Iran's nuclear program. And Netanyahu wished Putin happy birthday. Now, what's interesting, at the Valdai Club, Putin was asked about the plan. He not only basically approved it, despite not having received approval from either Hamas or the Palestinian Authority, who, of course, according to the plan, are going to be sidelined alongside Hamas. He pushed again the two-state solution that we know is meaningless right now. And not only that, he praised Tony Blair as a very good statesman and talked about the times that they had shared coffee together at Blair's residence, sitting in their pajamas discussing the state of world affairs. And of course, you know, I don't think anybody would approve of any kind of recommendation of Blair as a peace envoy in the Middle East. And finally, of course, one of the issues that is not being touched on by the peace plan is the existence of ISIS agents that have been weaponized by Israel against the resistance factions, and who may raise their head in the future to basically target both civilians and resistance on behalf of Israel. And of course, the fact that Trump is using this as a rather gruesome and grotesque ladder to a potential of a Nobel Peace Prize, claiming that he's been recommended for it by the hostages' families. Quite horrific.
It is indeed, Vanessa. I think we'll come back to that in extra for sure. There's a lot to talk about there, but thank you very much indeed. Now, we'll come back to the United Kingdom, and indeed we will have a look at part of the government website, which you may not necessarily be familiar with, and that is the Accelerated Capability Environment, ACE, which describes itself as solving rapidly changing digital and data challenges facing law enforcement and national security agencies, and they bring together expertise from industry and academia to innovate collaboratively and create mission impact at pace. You can imagine the tone with which it continues, all of which could be entirely meaningless. Now, this goes back some years, in fact, but the reason I mention it today is because the government website is awash with documents saying how the ACE has dealt with various departmental initiatives, innovations, and how it's going to streamline all sorts of processes and deliver things that may not have been possible before. Now, of course, the inference to be drawn is there aren't very many human beings involved in all of this, and indeed, you would be right to come to that conclusion. It's a Home Office capability, and it was, at least it's not coincidental at all, to consider that it was founded by what was then the Office for Security and Counter-Terrorism, the OSCT, back in 2017. It's been reported on by UK Column in the past. Now, as it's grown, it's applied its approach to a lot of, again, what's described as being innovation and co-creation and dealing with public safety and security and all that kind of thing. Now, the point to make here is that it's being made to look like it's owned and controlled by the Home Office. But of course, that's not so. It says that it's powered by Vivace, a community of multidisciplinary organizations and experts drawn from industry and academia who collaborate to deliver highly innovative solutions at pace. In other words, corporations involved in data harvesting and all sorts of technological innovations and advancements, which are going to be controlling on behalf of the Home Office things that pertain to all aspects of government. Now, we listened to Ben and Brian talking about Tony Blair's sort of intervention, suggesting how AI can improve every aspect of government without really being able to articulate how during Monday's news programme. And this seems to be exactly what's being referred to here. There should be a number of concerns falling out of it, but specifically with regard to policing, because they're talking about creating an AI lab for policing. Now, it almost seems like it would be made up because this is to deal with the crime that has resulted from generative AI in the first place. But they say it'll play a significant role in shaping the police service of the future, bolstering capabilities by making investigations more sophisticated and efficient, as well as freeing up officers' time. Now, going back to who controls or owns this capability, and with the police operational, a very important criteria of operational independence in mind, it is, again, hugely concerning. This looks like an investigation process would not only be owned, in effect, perhaps in name by the Home Office, but in actual fact by private corporations, which would have an extraordinary amount of influence over the outcome of an investigation, considering all the sorts of biases that may be introduced into artificial intelligence in the first place. Now, there are plenty of things to look at behind the scenes here. The government have also put out a document talking about keeping police one step ahead of criminals using AI. One wonders why it's only one step ahead. It doesn't really reinforce the point that AI is indeed the salvation to all these problems. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, these are in large part creations of generative AI in the first place. And so we are told on the one hand by the government that it is the answer to absolutely everything, but it seems to be the answer for criminals who are, of course, exploiting it to great effect. Now, the other thing to draw your attention to is that the oversight of this is from the Public Safety Group, which is headed up by Richard Clarke, who sits within the Home Office. And indeed, he attended the Digital Policing Summit earlier this year. And I'm just showing you the text, which refers to the sponsors, principal sponsors being Palantir, BT, and Amazon Web Services, of course, among many others. But it demonstrates the ever closer relationship between the government and, in particular, tech corporations. Now, from the report itself, they describe Amazon Web Services as working with public safety organizations to build the next generation of national security, justice, police, fire and rescue solutions. And they, in particular, quote sort of Palantir and talk about how they're partnering police forces in the UK in support of challenges ranging from helping City of London police fight economic crime and so on and so forth. But again, considering the tender notice for this, they talk about the private sector partner requirement is for a supplier to work closely with the authority to act as a flexible commissioning and delivery partner with the responsibility for the dynamic ecosystem and collaboration platform to deliver commissioned ACE customer requirements. This is gobbledygook, but the point is the tender that was put out to the organisations that were going to be competing for this is also suggesting, with the concluding remark, that it is to jointly protect His Majesty's government interest. Now, it's very hard to see how that particular circle can be squared, and I think gives enormous concerns, not just with the way in which AI is being rolled out across governments, but specifically with regard to the companies that are going to be given the very contracts with which to do that, and how they may exert their influence, in this instance, via policing, and the terrible results that could lead to. Now, AI, of course, suggested to be the answer to everything. Is it? Well, I would direct you towards the UK Column website, where you'll find an interview there, Germ Warfare, talking to Jobs Langrebe and Barry Smith, why machines will never rule the world. And there's a lot to learn about what's described as the sort of sentience of AI, and indeed whether such a thing does actually exist or not. So that concludes that particular report on AI and policing, and we're going to go back to Vanessa now. Of course, we talked specifically about Gaza, but you're going to tell us a bit more about Netanyahu and what he's been doing.
Yes, I apologise for the various videos of his recent conversation with Ben Shapiro. It's not pleasant viewing. The first of all, he talks about, he's of course speaking about 2 years of the Holocaust against the Israeli Jews. So anyway, let's just play this first section of the video.
The worst atrocities committed on Jews since the Holocaust, and everybody thought Israel was doomed. 2 years later, we've smashed the Iran axis, smashed most of its proxies. Hamas, not finished yet, but we'll get there. Hezbollah, Syria is gone. Smashed also Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. Still there, but it rolled it really back with President Trump's help. And the Houthis.
Now, of course, these are not the words of someone that is working on a peace deal, and of course they never have been. But having said that, they've basically smashed the entire, as he describes it, Iranian resistance axis, he then goes on to mention the threats from Iran that still exist. So let's just roll this.
Shared the labor, and we achieved this neutralization of Iran, which could blackmail every American city. People probably don't believe it, right? They don't believe it. Oh, we're far away, right? No, you're not. Iran is developing now ballistic missiles that are intercontinental ballistic missiles for 8,000 kilometer range. What does that mean? They add another 3,000 kilometers, and they've got under their atomic guns, New York City in target, Washington, Boston, Miami, Mar-a-Lago.
So what this does appear to be doing, of course, is lining up for a potential false flag to reignite war against Iran. And then as part of what he's talking about, you'll remember that we reported on UK Column that back in 2022, there was a report based on documents that had just been released talking about placing poison in the wells. Documents point to the Israeli army's 1948 biological warfare known as cast-thy bread. And of course, that's nothing, well, rather that has been continued with the use of white phosphorus, with settlers continuing to poison the wells in the occupied territories and the West Bank, the dumping of sewage into the Sea of Gaza, etc. But let's hear how Netanyahu talks about the rise in anti-Semitism and what it's all based upon.
Lies perpetrated about Jews, these vilifications, we poison the wells, we drink the children, the blood of children, and all sorts of crazy things. And that's repeated today. That's not new.
Well, no, it's not new, perhaps because you do actually do the things that you're accused of. And very interesting, I took this just from Wikipedia. I can hear a sharp intake of breath from everyone. Yes, I did use Wikipedia as a resource, but let's have a look at what it says. So very generic. Israel and weapons of mass destruction. They're, of course, believed to possess weapons of mass destruction and to be one of 4 nuclear-armed countries, the only one in the Middle East, because, of course, they have, under the Begin doctrine, not allowed any Arab nation to defend itself by developing nuclear weapons. It's not recognized as a nuclear weapon state by the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. But the US Congress Office of Technology Assessment has also recorded Israel as a country, generally reported as having undeclared chemical warfare capabilities and an offensive biological warfare program. Officially, Israel neither confirms nor denies possessing nuclear weapons. But this is actually taken from a paper written by Dr. Avner Cohen back in 2001. Very interesting. I recommend reading the whole paper. In April 1948, David Ben-Gurion, Israel's founding father and first prime minister, wrote a letter to Ehud Avriel, one of the Jewish agency's operatives in Europe, ordering him to seek out and recruit East European Jewish scientists who could either increase the capacity to kill masses or to cure masses. Both are important. One of the scientists Avriel recruited was a 30-year-old epidemiologist and colonel in the Red Army named Avraham Marcus Klingberg. In the time, Klingberg became one of Israel's leading scientists in the area of chemical and biological weapons. He was among the founding members and subsequently the deputy director of the Israel Institute of Biological Research. So they clearly have offensive weapons of mass destruction. And let's hear Netanyahu talk about that.
That's defensive weapons. What about offensive weapons? Well, I can tell you we shared it with America, but I can't share it with you. Okay? The most advanced offensive weapons on the planet, things that none of the superpowers have, developed by Israel, shared with America. That's very important because, you have to be strong. Everybody understands that. That's what President Trump says, and he says it correctly. Peace through strength. You got to be strong in order to get the peace. So Israel helps with offensive and defensive technologies, but also Israel helps with intel.
So if I have to make a prediction, every time there is some kind of ceasefire, it generally means, as we saw with the ceasefire with Hezbollah back in November 2024, which led to, of course, the fall of Syria, we see Israel effectively pivot towards another area in the region. And in my opinion, it's going to be Iraq, also potentially Yemen and Iran. But what is interesting, there has been a push to disarm the resistance in Iraq, as this report states, and we've talked about regularly. There's also, according to this report in Stars and Stripes, the US are withdrawing their troops from Iraq, so it begins reducing its mission in Iraq. And we've been hearing about the super offensive weapons. There is potential for use of bioweapons, in my opinion, with the withdrawal of the US troops against the Iraqi resistance factions. I hope not, but I don't believe that Israel is going to hold back on anything in the coming months.
No, I would absolutely have to agree with you, Vanessa, and certainly from what Netanyahu says, holding back seems like the least likely course of action. And of course, the talk about peace through strength seems completely discordant with his language about smashing absolutely everybody in sight. But of course, we'll continue to keep an eye on that. But thank you very much indeed for that, and we'll come back to it in extra. Now, there is a slim chance that you may be watching this program on YouTube, and that might not be such a surprise because we do have a YouTube channel that's been set up at some point this year. But in 2021, the original YouTube channel that belonged to UK Column was removed for a host of reasons. It's been a long-running battle. And this morning, Mike Robinson discovered that it has been reinstated. And this is, in many ways, a very significant moment. We're not absolutely sure why it has happened, and there doesn't seem to have been any sense of fanfare or responsibility upon YouTube to explain the reasons why. And of course, if you have followed this, you will be considering the question that I put on screen now, which is, of course, but for how long? Because the track record with YouTube in particular has been extraordinarily bumpy and inconsistent, but also terrifically oppressive. And again, this is something that Mike has illustrated very well in the past, which is that not only has YouTube sought to censor UK column, but also those that have introduced UK column content into their own broadcasting. So the way in which this regime continues is absolutely phenomenal. But we're putting this across as obviously a positive story. We have nearly 100,000 subscribers on that channel, and the idea that this will be brought back into their can't think of the word, my apologies, but people will be able to view it in a way that they couldn't before is great news. Now, if this strikes you as sort of slightly out of context, you're not quite sure what it's all about, then I would encourage you to go to the UK Column website and look at the censored section, which charts a course throughout all of this. Now, just before we close, I'll just ask Vanessa for a quick comment on the relationship with YouTube in particular in this extraordinary era of censorship in which we now are forced to operate.
Yeah, well, even uploading UK column news excerpts was subject to censorship quite often. My channel wasn't closed down, but those excerpts were taken down. And as Mike pointed out before we came on today, the Syria podcasts, which were formerly up on YouTube, have not been restored to their former glory. They're still missing. So hopefully they will come back if YouTube's feeling generous.
Not sure about that, but still, we will concentrate on the positives. UK Column is back on the main YouTube channel, and long may that continue, because, of course, there is insufficient justification for taking material that we do put out down, because it is absolutely well researched, as you will know if you've been following this for any length of time. And if you doubt me, please do verify as best you can everything that we do put out. It is very important that we are seen to be doing so correctly. Now, thank you very much for joining us on this program. Vanessa, thanks for coming in on the live link. Please, if you are a UK Column member, hold on for a few minutes and we will rejoin in at about 4:10 UK Column News Extra. And also just a reminder that going out tonight, we have Germ talking to Karzar on the nuances surrounding the history concerning Chairman Mao. And then going out tomorrow at 1:00 is Patrick Henningson's talk from the Hope Freedom event back in August. Otherwise, we hope you will join us for the news programme at 1:00 on Friday. Goodbye.